All right. Welcome, Web18, to your first day at Lambda School at User Interface 1. We're going to be talking about HTML, semantics, CSS. We'll specifically go look at those objectives, but I want to talk about CodePen really quick. So with CodePen, this is our way to communicate code to each other. We've already talked about communication earlier today, of just inside of chats. So this CodePen link that I just sent to you in channel, go ahead and click that link. Everybody click that link. Also, I'm going to open up a questions thread now. So questions thread for UI, so that stands for User Interface 1. So go ahead, if you have any questions about the content that you've read, that's the one you want to do. Sorry, Ben, I owned you. So in this case, you've got to be able to put in the red question mark, showing me that you've taken the time to put thought into that question. And again, I will get there, but I'm going to go to my concepts now. Okay, so if we go to our concepts here, we've got describe and use semantic HTML to mark up content. We've got the use of CSS selectors, and we've got CSS specificity. Okay, so hold on a second. In the questions thread, I saw Ben make a funny comment, and then we had a couple more people make a comment on that. That stuff needs to stay out of the questions thread. Wah, wah. So go ahead and delete those things that are not questions inside the questions thread so we can keep that as sacred ground. And you could totally say those things in the main thread, but not in the questions thread. That's going to help us maintain sanity over weeks and weeks of learning hard things. Thank you, thank you. Okay. Ben causing so many problems already. So the User Interface 1, Airport, Web18, this is going to be our starter file that I've already given you. It should be inside of the thread. Everybody should have clicked on it. So here's some cool stuff. If I make a change, so if I come in here and I just say, what up, Web18, and if I hit save, and if you refresh your link that you already clicked on, it's going to have what up, Web18 inside of it. This is a beautiful tool for teaching. It's my de facto tool for teaching web fundamentals. So CodePen is the best thing for getting code across many, many places really quickly. However, if you are feeling like you want to have your own code and you want to have my code, well, guess what? You can do that by hitting the fork button. So if you feel like you want to follow along, even though there's some moments I actually don't want you to follow along, I just want you to pay attention. But if you hit that fork button, I'm going to do it really quick here to show you what a fork looks like. Notice the page just refreshed. But what happened is it actually made a copy of it. So I'm going to say copy. And then I'll hit save. I'm going to show you how this is an actual copy. So if I go to Lambda School, which I'm the owner of this dashboard here, I've actually made, well, inside here, we'll come back to this. We'll go to pens. You can see that there's my Web18 copy. It has 0 views on it because it belongs just to me. Then over here, here's our Web Interface 1. So there's 89 of you that have actually clicked this and seen this link. So this proves to you that the fork did actually work. I'm going to go ahead and delete this fork, though, because I don't need it. So I'm going to come back to Web18. And this is where we should be working. Let's see. The question was asked, can we change the view? How do we look like that? So up here, there's this change view button. And you can see it says edit layout. And I think the default view looks like that. I prefer the left to right view personally. Some people like right to left. But for me, I like left to right when I'm teaching. So that's the one I'll teach in most. Okay. I'll add this to your collection. So what a collection is Web18 guided projects. Let me go to that really quickly, and then we'll be done with our logistics for the day. So this is going to be this link right here. I'm going to put this in channel, and I'm going to pin it because it's really important. Pin to Web18. Yes, pin this. And in fact, I'm going to edit this to make sure it says Web18 guided projects collection. This will make more sense to you even tomorrow when we have more content in here. So what we're going to do is basically every day you're going to get a guided project Monday through Thursday. And that at least full-time in our full-time course. In this case, you will see User Interface 2 with a new project tomorrow that we'll work on. This will be your way of like seeing all the stuff ever that we've worked on since you've been within your web fundamentals. So the whole 4 weeks of instruction that I'm with you, we'll be doing that. So this is going to be really helpful for you as a reference when you're trying to go through your projects in the afternoon. So that's why I want to keep that pinned. If you're taking notes of like important things, this is a very important URL because every day I'm going to add whatever we do to that collection. And it's super valuable for you to go back to Web18. Okay. Yes, the question was asked, should we create an account to CodePen? And I think yes. It's just valuable for you and it's free. But you don't actually have to have one if you don't want to. That collection could be the only thing you have. Great, okay. Now that CodePen's in place, let me say, are there any questions about CodePen? Anything about this environment? Mary says, should we follow along in the forked copy or the original? Mary, I think if you're feeling really confident about things, fork it and try to follow along when I tell you to. But otherwise, I would stay on the main. And then if you want, forking is just like if you want to try something. But stay on the main while we're in the guided project. If you don't see the save button, it might be because you don't have an account. But there should be an option to save on every pen. Yeah, unless you didn't fork it. Save is only for me because I own it. That's a good question. Okay, I haven't seen any red question marks, so you guys have kind of forgotten the red question marks already. So just remember, the red question marks are a way for me to have that thing pop out and I can see it easier. Because as you can see, there's people commenting and there's people asking questions. Okay, let's get started. Anthony, really quick, is it okay if we completed it? Completed what? So Anthony, what are you talking about? Is it okay if we completed it? So go ahead and answer that at your own leisure. Charles says, do we do the airport one or the other one? This one right here, where it says Web18 in it. So this is the link I gave you. I'll give it to you again, just in case we're all catching up again. All right, let's get started. So first day, by the way, I've got built into the first day this kind of review. So like I expect fully to talk about CodePen, Slack chat. It's all part of the plan. So don't freak out if you're like, we haven't talked about any code yet. Don't worry. First day is always like this at any school, anywhere you go. That first orientation is going on right now. And now we're getting into the stuff that we need. All right, so here we go. We're going to be talking about semantic HTML. I am making some assumptions that through the pre-course work that you've seen a couple of what tags look like in HTML. Here's the crazy thing about what HTML, so HTML is hypertext markup language. HT, hypertext, stands for anchor tags or being able to hypertext reference anything. So an anchor tag looks like an A. And here's the cool thing. In CodePen and in most modern editors, you can hit tab and it'll autocomplete the full tag for you using a little program called Emmet under the hood. So in this case, I just typed A and hit tab. You will see me do that a lot just to save time. However, as a new learner, I think it's wise of you to get some muscle memory in writing out the full tag so you can experience that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go to lambdaschool.com. Just watch. Don't worry about following along at this point. And I'm going to pop in a URL. Notice I've got a full URL here, and I've got this thing called href. Href stands for hypertext reference. This is the hypertext reference. And then we're using an assignment operator. See that right there? I want you to get used to the idea of an operator or something that's being operated on and not say equals to. So href equals to makes me cringe a little. You want to make sure you're saying assign the value of. So the href is assign the value of, and in this case, we have a URL. And then we come in here, Lydia just made me cringe, and we come in here and it says Lambda School. So in this case, we can now go to Lambda School. Now here's the thing. If I click this right now, I'm going to hit save. Click. It went inside the window. That's cool and all, but we didn't want to mess with our code pen. We didn't want this to get wrecked by our link. So there's this weird attribute. And notice that anything that's not the default tag is considered an attribute. So this href is called an HTML attribute. We also have another attribute called target. Assign the value of, and then in this case, underscore blank. This is just super weird. It's just weird that it's an underscore, and it's weird that it says blank. What this does is it opens up a new tab instead of refreshing the page itself. So if I hit save, I hit Lambda School, now watch what happens. Click, new tab opens up, and Lambda School is inside of here. This is extremely valuable if you're ever linking out of your web page, but you don't want to do that if you're linking internally on your web page. And that is for search engine optimization, and you don't want people to have a million tabs of all your web pages on it. So just keep that in the back of your mind. The target underscore blank is used for linking out. So this quite literally is the HT in HTML. So the ML, markup language, is we're using a specific subset of rules we're following, and we're following those rules, and so is the browser. So the browser this itself is an application, right? I don't think that it's the internet. Think it's an application that connects to the internet and follows some rules to render things on the internet. In this case, I'm using Google Chrome. I like Chrome for its dev tools and for it's easier for it to explain on multiple operating systems. But if you have your own browser that you prefer, that's just great. However, Chrome is what we're going to be teaching on during the web portion, at least in the web fundamentals. So the markup language matters. So how do we know what markup language we should be writing in? Well, we have a standard called HTML5, and it's set up by a doc type. So let's go find out what the heck that means. So I'm going to give you this link if you want to follow along. You don't have to. You can just kind of stare at the screen here. But in this case, you can see that this little line right here is all it is. It's a self-closing tag, meaning that there is no end tag. It doesn't have like a slash at the end of it. It's kind of unique. It's telling the browser, hey, I'm following a subset standard of rules, and the tag should work on every browser that follows these rules as well. It's like, wait a second, does that mean you can write any tag? And the answer is yes. You could actually write your own custom tags. However, they wouldn't be guaranteed to work or understood on all multiple browsers and devices. So this doc type tells the browser, hey, I want to use these tags. And it tells you which browsers support them. In this case, all of these browsers, all the major browsers support HTML5. Okay? So when someone says, have you used HTML5 or am I using HTML5? You just say, yep, and you have that one tag right there. This was a huge buzzword like 5 years ago when HTML5 was like being built and standardized. Everybody's like, oh, is your site HTML5? And I was like, yes. And what they really meant to say was, are you using JavaScript? But business people did not understand that. And they would say, oh, our website's in HTML5. And I always just laughed. But in this case, HTML5 is just this tag saying we're going to follow the standards. So what are those standards? Well, look at all these tags over here. There's a lot of tags. And HTML5 introduced more semantic tags, and we'll talk about what those mean. So if we come back to our code here, just to prove, by the way, that we can do any tag we want, we're going to be doing an airport mock-up here. So I'm going to say airport. And guess what? If I hit tab, I can make a tag. Say, this is, oh my gosh, my custom tag. And you can see that it does actually render correctly. And I can actually use CSS on that tag. I could say font size 50px, and I could say color red, and it works. Oops, got to make sure I use the right syntax. So in this case, you can see that my airport tag, as ugly as it is working. This is dangerous on multiple browsers because not all of them know what the airport tag is. And so if they don't know what it is, they'll just disregard it or treat it as a div. They won't give it any meaning. So yes, you can use your own tags, but no, I don't recommend it. Okay, so at this point, I keep talking about this funny word semantic. Semantic equates to, so triple equals, meaningful code. Well, what is meaningful code? Well, in my mind, it has three big portions of what meaningful code means. Number one, accessibility. So when someone is low vision or other many accessibility issues that we all face as human beings using technical devices, we have accessibility issues right there. Just the fact that humans are interfacing with hardware. And so when we have accessibility issues, like let's say we're low of seeing, like we can't see the screen very well, we might have a screen reader. Well, if we're using divs that are presentational markup, for example, they don't render the same way in a screen reader as a semantic markup tag. And so somebody that is hard of seeing, can't see, for example, might not be able to even comprehend or get caught up in a navigation system that's 4,000 pieces long. And they just lose interest in your site, or they can't even use it. The thing is, that used to just be super sad. Now it's become legal. So the governments around the world are starting to make it illegal for web pages to be inaccessible when it comes to, specifically right now, government pages and things that are required by people to use. So accessibility actually is its own, like just this one bullet point here is its own industry. So we'll continue to talk about accessibility as we develop, but it's number one for semantic why it matters. Number two, the next developer reading your code. So the next developer, it could be you, by the way. You could be reading your code from 6 months ago and being like, oh my gosh, what was I trying to do? If you wrote your code in a meaningful way, it'll be easier for you to consume in the future. Lastly, but also extremely important, search engine optimization. This is more towards marketers and people that are trying to make money with content-driven websites. But Google, Bing, Yahoo, any search engine, they read your code in a different way, depending on how you marked it up. And if you use nothing but presentational markup, it's very hard for those search engines to understand how to read your code. So these are three really big reasons why you should understand what semantic and meaningful code looks like. The opposite, I think it's always good to have an example and a non-example. So the opposite of semantic is presentational. Presentational style. I probably did not spell that right because spelling is so hard for me. So inside of our style, number one is the layout. Oh man. So in this case, laying out the site is so important for people that can see the web page, and you want to have a good user experience. So I would say UX, in this case, is user experience. Like how to use your website, how to click it, how to, like if you have a form that says buy now or something and it's in the wrong spot, having presentational markup is so important. The number two, well, I guess what I just said is marketing to your users. And in this case, being able to tell your users what to do. And I guess you could say the instruction is the same thing as user experience. So I would say aesthetics, really. Just is your site beautiful for those that can see it? And then marketing to your users, instruction. So that's more UX. These are extremely important things because sometimes if you come to a website and it looks like crap and maybe you're not using a screen reader and you just come to the website and it's unusable just from visible, you don't even know what to do, that's extremely bad. So we need to have a good balance between meaningful code and presentational code. So guess what? They work hand in hand. I think sometimes new developers hear semantic and they think, I must be semantic always and forever. And the answer is that's just not true. Sometimes you need semantics and sometimes you need presentational. So we're going to demonstrate both of them now. So before I get into the demonstration of semantic and presentational, are there any questions about what I've talked about? Okay, I don't see anything unless he says what view are you using. So remember, I'm using the change view and then the edit layout. So that's how I'm doing that. Anthony says the current guided. So you're saying if you've gone through and done some things, that's fine, Anthony. If you're feeling confident, it's just fine. Okay, don't see any questions. Let's go ahead and take our first 30-minute break here. That's right. We've gone through 30 minutes already. So let's take a 5-minute breather. When we come back, we will jump into what the tags look like and how to use them. 5-minute timer. Here we go. I'll change the screen to it. Remember to stand up, take a break. All right, come on back. Come on back. Sound like such an interesting programmer. Okay, let's go over here. Share where we left off. Okay. Just so you know, I've got a massive background in user experience and design. That was actually where I came from first. And programming second is really my background. And so this is something that some of you might like not enjoy, but I find it fascinating. And if you want to learn more, the book I recommend everybody is called Don't Make Me Think, as their first introduction to user experience. So if some of this stuff I've been saying makes you go, man, I want to learn more about that, this is a great book by, what's his name? Steve Krug. So yeah, go grab that book if you're finding the concept of thinking about other people using your web page, because I think it's extremely important. All right, so with our HTML in place, we now have this A tag. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. We're going to be introducing another A tag in a second anyway, but I want to keep our project cleaned up here. So let's talk about presentational versus semantic markup tags. And we're actually going to start with presentational because we need to form our code up and control our code. So I'm going to use a div. A div stands for division of code. And it's basically, think of it as an invisible box, or sometimes not so invisible box, surrounding our code and giving us design structure. So I'm actually going to wrap everything in a container. Now in Emmet, I can write the code like that and hit tab, but it does introduce an interesting new attribute called class. Now classes, these should be review for you, I hope. If anything of this is not review, I highly recommend that you read this whole website in your spare time, if you have any, because Interneting is Hard is my favorite web page for people that need to get those fundamentals in place. It's a beautiful, talk about user experience, beautiful web page. Highly recommend it for those of you that might be struggling with some of the concepts I'm even saying right now. So inside of this div container, I'm going to put our whole web page. So notice what I've done. This is the anatomy of a tag. We've got our closing div tag. There's our slash that indicates that it's closing. I'm going to wrap our whole web page in this closing div tag. And I want these tags to be all the way to the left here. It doesn't matter, by the way, but it matters to me, and it always matters to what I call the big boss. So the big boss is the person that you're working for. It could be your lead programmer. It could be the owner of the company. It could be just the project manager that you're working with. So the big boss is a phrase I use quite a bit to describe some concept that will ultimately be controlled by where you work. So in this case, I'm the big boss, and I want my container tag to wrap, and I want it to be on the furthest most left space here. All right. So right here, I've got basically this container. Now, what I can do is I could start controlling it. So I could say container like that. And look at that, font size 50px. I mean, that's why you want to have one big something to control everything. I'm going to delete that for now. We'll come back to this later, but you can see how powerful that is just by wrapping one tag. Now notice I can actually minimize my tag inside of CodePen, and most IDEs can do this. Remember, the one that we prefer is VS Code if you're working on your local. And by the way, if you ever want to take all the work we're doing and you want to bring it down to your local machine, you can actually come down here and hit this export button, and you can just get it as a zip file or on GitHub. But in this case, the zip file will just give you all the HTML and CSS that we write. So if you ever just want to bring it down and out of CodePen, it's so cool. All right. So now what we've done is that we've got ourselves some presentational tag to control. Now, in this case, it says, what up, Web18? I'm going to delete that because it doesn't matter for our international airport. So international airport is going to be the #1 thing that Google needs to know about us. And so in this case, search engine optimizations, they need to know, well, what is the #1 thing that we should know about you? And for us, we're going to try to tell Google we're running in an international airport. So the way we can actually tell Google, so here we go, I'm using a new word. I'm explaining my website to somebody. So that should tip you off that we're now using semantic. I'm going to be using a heading tag, so an H1. An H1 specifically tells search engines, I am the most important thing on this web page. H1s are extremely valuable for search engine optimization. H2s, H3s, and H4s, they're good, and they do showcase different hierarchies of content meaning, but H1 is the most important. It's still used by all search engines to this day. So make sure that if you want Google to know who you are, you're wrapping whatever that is in an H1 tag. That's how important those heading tags are. So in this case, I've got what looks to be a navigation system. So notice that my content is not really formed, it's just a bunch of gobbledygook. Well, I need to start forming my content up using my tags, right? So in this case, I could put another div here and say it's a header, but the problem is I'm starting to lose some of my meaning because I'm just using a div. So what I can do, and by the way, I want to tab this in just to give myself some visualization that the H1 is actually inside of container. That concept of having something inside of something else is called nesting. So inside of here, I've now nested my H1 inside of my container div. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to write header. Header is another tag that we gained in our HTML5. I'm going to go ahead and grab these navigation items and put them inside of here. Now, it would probably be wise of me to include my H1 inside of my header. So I'm basically telling Google, hey, this is the #1 thing I want you to view on my web page. So header lets, again, next developer and search engines know that this stuff should be treated as the first content it should consume. You can't get that same information using a div. It just doesn't matter to the search engine. It just thinks it's a div. But if we say header, it does actually provide meaning, and that's when we start saying semantic. So semantic HTML provides meaning. So how the heck are we supposed to know what tags are which? Well, we can actually just Google it. We could say semantic HTML tags. We can go in here and look at semantic elements. And it gives you a list of some really highly used semantic elements. So in this case, and then you can start reading about them. So this is the hard thing when you're a self-learner, when you're a MOOC, you're doing things on your own, you don't have an instructor guiding you, you end up actually getting a lot of information, but you don't know what really matters and what really doesn't matter. And so I'm here to tell you some things that do matter and things that don't matter very much. In this case, header matters because it's letting people know what you're doing. And again, the next developer and also search engines. But guess what? We'll still use anchor tags. They don't go away. So our A tag will wrap around our home. And of course, we could put an href in here. I'm going to use a pound symbol for now, which just tells the browser to refresh the page. And then I'm just going to quickly mark up all these anchor tags here. And notice that I do need a closing anchor tag. Otherwise, it can bleed out and make everything clickable. So if I don't close that tag, you can see that it wrecks my HTML and tries to render it out there. So make sure that you're ending your tags properly. And you can check, by the way, you can actually analyze your HTML. And if I click this, it'll tell me every error I have. But for now, I'm not going to worry about it. So in this case, I now have semantically formed up some of my code. So I've got my container that's containing everything. That's presentational. I've got my header, my H1, and my A tags. But the A tags are kind of flying off on their own. I need to control them with one more tag. And so a nav tag, oops. Oh my goodness, sometimes Emmett's your best friend and your worst enemy. Nav, there we go. So a nav tag is great because it'll actually tell browsers to skip over certain things if they're inside of a screen reader. So it doesn't just read every single item. You can actually opt into it or not. So that's why nav tags are important. And then notice I'm not using an unordered list with list items. That is because I want my A tags to be just nested inside of my nav. So in the olden days, and some people still do this, is you'll have an unordered list with list items with A tags in them. And it would look like that. So you can see how much more work we would have to do for these extra markup items. This was very, very common for a long time to have this layout. But now, with semantic tags, we can make things a little bit cleaner and easier to read using a nav with A tags. But again, this all depends on the big boss, wherever you're working. Some people still haven't warmed up to tags. Maybe they're old developers from 10 years ago, and they just don't understand the value of them. So this is a combination of presentational markup and semantic markup. Now you might be saying, well, isn't H1 a markup? Can't you actually code or color these things and stuff? Yes, you can. So I could actually go into my header tag and I could change the color to like red. And you can see it changed the heading of my color to red. That does not mean it's not presentational. Like we can still style things with CSS, but the meaning of the content, that's what we're talking about when we say semantic. Like this actually has meaning to the browser. Okay, so at this point, I've shown you header, an H1, a nav tag. Let's get into controlling bigger chunks of code. We use section tags for that. So a section tag tells the browser this is a section of content and I want it to be separate from another section of content. So I can come in here and put these things inside of my section. Now, this is another heading. So I'm going to use an H2 to describe to the browser that this is an important heading, yes, but it's not the only thing that's important in the page. So it's secondary in importance to my H1. Does that make sense? So our H2, we can have multiple H1s and H2s, by the way. However, it would be very bad of you to have multiple H1s. And in fact, the first one will be understood and the rest of them will be ignored, depending on the browser. So the recommendation from me to you, only have one H1 on your page. You can have multiple H2s. It doesn't matter compared to the H1 regarding search engine optimization. All right, and notice I've got some lorem ipsum. If you've not seen this silly looking text before, it's used by designers and developers alike to provide filler content without having to actually write content. Content writing is a whole nother field. It's extremely valuable and extremely hard. So in this case, we use lorem ipsum to skirt around those things to give us some content. All right, I'm going to introduce you to another tag called the P tag. P tag stands for paragraph. This tag allows us to form up our content. And we're going to talk more about why this is important tomorrow when we start talking about box model and all that fun stuff. But for now, understand the P tag is giving us a paragraph. I'm going to go ahead and make another P tag here. And now we can see a problem where when we get into CSS, I want you to look on the right here. Notice that we're starting to form up our content. We went from, just a bunch of crap to nicely formed content that the browser can understand better. So like we're slowly adding our semantics and presentational markup here. So just looking at it, you can clearly see there's a difference. But more than this, there's multiple P tags now. So how could we separate these P tags out and have difference between them? Well, we can use classes. We could use an ID. We could use different attributes. So I want you to understand the proper word here is attribute. And we can actually introduce a new attribute like class, for example. And so we could say like first paragraph or first P or whatever. So we'll come back to that when we get into the CSS. I want to finish marking this code up, and I want to give you an opportunity to mark up some code. So after this section tag, we've got another section that's brand new. So guess what? New section tag. And then we can use an H2 again if we wanted to be on the same level. So book a flight. Actually, book a flight is going to be a button. I forgot. Need to put that up here. So before we get down to the other stuff, let me write a button out for you. So a button is semantic, meaning it provides meaning to the browser and knows when something should be clicked if you're on a screen reader, for example. So there's a huge difference between this, like a div with like a button class, and our actual button semantic here. So this will not be understood by a screen reader. It'll just be a div. but a button will actually trigger an event and say, hey, do you want to click on this thing? So that's how big semantics are. You could actually miss out on a huge population of people by just not writing your button properly. So this is not what we want. We want the button semantic tag. And notice what it did. It actually gave us a whole button with even a click state built into it. We'll have to fight that in CSS later, but that's fine. So in this case, we've got our button. Okay, so let's come back here. Plan a flight will go on my H2. I'll bring in this content over here. I'll pop a P tag on both. Just getting some practice here now. We've seen this before. Grabbing my end tag. Of course, I'll hit save so you guys can get everything I'm doing. Whenever I form things up, I'm hitting Shift Tab, and what it'll do is it'll try to find the white space automatically and form it up nicely. So when I highlight everything and I hit Shift Tab, it'll clean it up. Okay, I'm going to hit save so you have everything I've got. And then I want you to notice we've got another navigation at the bottom, which is very common to see, by the way. So what we can do is just grab our nav up here, get rid of all this stuff, and we've already got our navigation. The only difference now is instead of being inside of a header, we probably want it to be inside of a footer, letting the web page know that this is the end of our content. So we're providing a lot of meaning with our code now compared to if we just had a bunch of divs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to minimize all of our section tags. And by the way, white space, again, is up to whoever you work with. It's always good to clean it up so it's really good-looking code. Now, what is good-looking code? Well, good-looking code has indentation showcasing nesting. So this is good because you can quickly see and see which tags are actually nested inside of here. Now you can see how meaningful this page is. We've got a header, we've got a footer, and then we've got two sections, chunks of information. This is much more important to the browser now. And look at our code on the right. It looks a lot prettier, right? We can actually understand and look at our code, and it's not just gobbledygook anymore. So if I open up my section tags again, you can see I've got my P tags and my H2 inside of here and a button. And notice that you can see based on the indentation. So let me just highlight that really quickly. I want you to start seeing these things earlier in your career instead of later. So see this little space I've provided here? These visual spaces here are a huge indicator of nesting and that relationship between the section tag and the H2. So this is something I want to call out now so that you see it now and you don't just write code that has no indentation in it. That's a huge telltale sign when you're interviewing. Okay, I've covered a lot of concepts. Let me go to the questions thread and answer anything I've missed. So Amir says, hey, what is a screen reader? So Google just came out with web.dev, and it's basically them telling you how they want you to write code, which is fine. But they came out with this amazing accessibility link. This is brand new stuff, like not been around on the internet for a while, this web page. And you can actually go and use, part 3 actually shows you what a screen reader is and lets you actually play with a screen reader here, and you can actually hear what it sounds like. It's pretty cool. So if you want to go through here and figure that stuff out, web.dev is where I would recommend you go. And then you'll start to see really quickly the differences. Great question. Okay. Okay. I scrolled a little too far. So the question was, so this is the first cohort where we have a user experience group with us and a user experience track, meaning they're part of Lambda School, so you know who you are. This is how you catch up. So this is your extra homework if you've not gone through. This is going to prepare you for everything that we're talking about. So those of you that are kind of freaking out if you're in that UX group, this is what I recommend to you to catch up. It's not very heavy. It's really good reading, good, well designed here. So If you're a little nervous, make sure you look at that. Christian says, do call to action buttons fall under the aesthetic category or UX? They fall under both. So a call to action is basically like what we did here with our book of flight. We want that to stick out more. But for now, semantically, it's helping people know that there's a button there. Any extension recommendations for VS Code? That's beyond scope today. I wouldn't, but I can get some recommendations for you later. But ultimately, it just depends on how you like to work. Joseph says, you said you always want a big thing that contains everything. Is there a benefit other than using the star selector? We will talk about that star selector, the universal selector, shortly. So we'll get to that, Joseph. Let's see. Josh says, so the semantic info is primarily for the benefit of search engines? Nope, it's primarily for the benefit of these three people. So all three are of paramount importance. Okay. See, this is why the red question marks are good, because I'm going to be able to skip over the comments. Dustin says, hey, tell me about the title tag. So what's happening here is CodePen is actually abstracting. There's a programming word, so write this down. An abstraction is something that takes something that's really difficult and removes a couple layers of difficulty and attempts to simplify it. So CodePen has simplified some of the things under the hood. So what I say under the hood, I mean the source code. So I could actually right-click on any white area over here, view page source, and then we get to see some of the abstractions that were taken away. So for example, you can see there's a bunch of meta tags, there's a head tag, there's the HTML tag, there's the doc type that we talked about, there's a link tag pointing out. So this is all going under the hood with CodePen. A very basic website is not going to have a lot of this stuff. CodePen, of course, is a massive, massive app as far as like its complexity and what it's doing for us under the hood. So if you scroll down, you start to see SVGs and symbols, and you're like, oh my gosh, this is really scary. But it's just HTML and CSS that we've written and that they've written. So all this stuff, all these buttons and all these things, they have to go somewhere, right? So they've abstracted that title tag away. But if we had a simpler web page with our own code, the title tag would change the name of the tab up here. So it's a good lesson on abstraction there. Is there a reference or training material to learn coder typing shortcuts? Emmet is really the only thing that I would recommend. Unless you go into Vim. But now is not the time for Vim if you're a new programmer. That's for later if you want it. Sean says title tags are for the head content. Yes. Okay. By the way, anybody that has that little black shield next to their name, they are a project manager, and I back up what they say. So if Sean answers something, he's already gone through this course. He's already gone through all the things that I've taught, and oftentimes he's giving answers that I would have given. If a PM says something that's a little off base just because they haven't been in the industry as long as I have, for example, I'll correct it. But everything that I've been seeing has been awesome. So if Sean says something, I back it up. Tyler says, how do you move a whole section of code back by a space for nesting? Oh, yeah, shift. Okay, you got it. I've read H1 tags don't affect SEO anymore, at least Google SEO. Other search engines might still use them. Any thoughts on this? So that's an interesting thing. Google constantly shifts differently than Bing, differently than Yahoo, differently than other search engines I'm not even saying. So, William, that can change all the time. And in fact, they could change back and add semantic tags back in. So if that's the current state of the union, then so be it. But understand that no matter what, by writing semantic HTML, we're providing the correct experience for the other two, right? So maybe number 3 is not as important all of a sudden for like an H1. Number 2 and number 1 still have importance. So that's the threefold mission of semantic tags. Is it okay to just mark things as P1, P2, etc.? No. Nope. They've got to be the semantic P tag, and then we can use classes to make them unique. Okay, Darian says, I see you use dot notation HTML. Is that one of those things that you also recommend? No, that was just for the Emmett thing that I was writing. Okay, because we have so many good questions, I see that Sean, Joseph, and other PMs are answering them as they come in. I'm going to have to rely on them more because we got to keep going. These are awesome questions, though. I love how engaged you are with just HTML right now. So what I want you to do now for the next 5 minutes is I'm going to give you some markup. So I'm going to go back to the dashboard, or I'm going to give you some content, I should say. I'm going to go to My Collections, and I've got some pre-built content for you. Let's see. I thought I already had it ready, dang it. Is it our demo helpers here? Yes, it is. So I've got a semantic HTML markup challenge for you. So basically, I've got a bunch of content. I've let you know through comments, by the way, this is what HTML comments look like. Comments are not rendered out in the browser. They're hidden from the browser. And these are meant for the developer to understand more of what's going on. Comments are extremely important to help the next developer, especially know what you were trying to do, just in case you were being a little weird with your code. Hopefully, it's just telling you like, hey, this is my main content, for example. So I want you to go through here. I've kind of already done this once with you with our exact airport thing, but we're going to give you another experience on your own. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to mark up as much as you can. I've given you a bunch of tags that you could use. And let's see how it feels for you as you go through. So take that link that I just put inside of channel. I'm going to put up a 5-minute timer. I want you to follow the instructions there and mark up the code. Okay, 5 minutes. Ready, go. All right, time is up. I took some time to go back and just read some of the questions while you were doing that. And there was a couple ones I wanted to answer. And hopefully just experiencing this for 5 minutes on your own, you started to have some light bulbs go off of just how it looks to form these content pieces. But Stephanie asked a really good question. She said, in most tutorials, I've seen the A tag used instead of the button tag. Is it best to use the button tag? So button tags are more akin to building an application. So when you start building single page applications or applications that are housed inside of just like one big programming thing like React, for example, you don't want to have an anchor tag and all of the nuances of an anchor tag where it refreshes the page, for example. Button tags won't refresh the page when you click them. So in that one way right there, in addition to all of the semantic stuff we talked about, the fact that the button tag doesn't refresh the page is really important and helpful for developers so they don't have to fight that behavior. So I just thought that was a good thing to note. Tenzing says, why header style doesn't affect the nav, though it's in the header tag? We will talk about that. I love that you noticed it, though. And Michael asked a question that other people were probably thinking, if we edit the code, will it make changes for everything or just for us? It'll be just for you. So don't be nervous to try out stuff on your own. Okay, those were some really good questions I wanted to bring up that I didn't get to before. All right, so in those past 5 minutes, hopefully you saw some of the interesting problems and solutions of walking through that code. Because of all the awesome questions we've had, we're going to have to just jump forward into the next concept, which is our CSS. A lot of the questions I've seen you asking are directly related to CSS. I'm like, I want to talk about it, but we can't do it yet. But before we do that, let's take a 30-minute, we're past our 30 minutes from the last time we took a break. I know some of our brains are turning into mush. So let's take a 5-minute break. I do not consider 5 minutes of programming a break. So what you just did was work. So let's take a 5-minute break. When we come back, we're going to jump right into our CSS specificity and classes and IDs and all that fun stuff. So 5-minute breather, and then we'll hit CSS for the rest of the hour. All right, come on back. We'll probably use the rest of the hour just because of the way time was chunked around today. So we'll probably just finish up strong for the rest of this hour without any more breaks, because by then it'll be like 5 minutes left or whatever. So buckle up for some CSS. I just posted a link in regards to understanding SEO. Some of you had some really good questions about H1s and if they're still valuable. And you know how I talked about they're still valuable, especially with these other things in mind. But it's a really good read if you're interested in, if you're thinking about going into marketing someday with your web skills. It's worth taking a look. If not, don't worry about it right now. It's not something you should be doing right now. It's for later. Okay, so let's talk about how all of this stuff gets translated into our CSS and how we can use different CSS selectors to manipulate our code. So you'll notice right now that our international airport code, while not ugly, is not pretty. It's just there, right? It's just providing information for us. But in this case, we probably want to make it just a little bit prettier, mark it up a little bit so it's got some form and function to it. And so with that, we want to use CSS. But you'll notice that there are some spaces already, like it's already got some spacing that's in here. These come from the browser by default. So one of the biggest things I'm going to teach you ever is to right-click on something and inspect the element. I want everybody to do this with me right now. So if you're following along or if you're not following along, pay attention. And I want you to right-click on the heading International Airport with me and hit Inspect. If you're using Chrome, it'll look like that. If you're using another browser, you can still do it. I just don't know the exact verbiage. I think it's Inspect on most browsers, though. If you're using Safari, I do recommend you stop using Safari for the duration, because the web tools are just substandard compared to Firefox and Chrome. So in this case, if we've got our H1, we can actually see a styles tab over here. Now, this is going to look different than yours probably, so it might look like this, it might look like this. It depends on how it all looks. But for me, this is what styles look like, so you have to find where your styles are. But they should either be under computed or event listeners or all this stuff. You should see this stuff somehow. So in my case, you can see that I've got these styles already applied. Look at all these styles: block, 2M, PX, bold, all these interesting properties right here. These are called user agent style sheet properties. Like these are this is from Chrome in this case, because I'm using Google Chrome. So Google Chrome has already put in their own styles. We're going to talk about why that matters tomorrow and how we can knock them out with our own reset. But for today, I want you to understand that there's a reason why all of our code here has spaces between it. And that's because Chrome has already implemented some styles under the hood. So we're going to be overriding their styles with our own styles. But I wanted to show that to you, and we will continue to use those developer tools throughout the course. So make sure that you get familiar with that. I'm going to go ahead and turn it off for now so we can focus on our code here. So going back to the training kit, we should now be able to describe and use semantic HTML tags. We're now going to be able to demonstrate the use of CSS selectors to style markup. So selectors are directly associated with their matching attributes. So in this case, the first one we're going to talk about is actually matching all elements. It's kind of interesting. It's called the universal or star selector. In this case, it will try to individually style each element that it can. So if I came in here and said color, oh my goodness, if I could type, red, you can see that if it can do it, it will do it. So it's always interesting to see a star selector go through and change every single thing. Now, for the intents of teaching, it's cool to say color red. For reality, there's only one style that I actually use, and it's called box sizing border box. And we're going to talk a lot about this tomorrow, but for today, just trust me that it's a good thing. It deals with the box model, and I'm not going to worry about it today. I just want you to see that that's the only style that I actually use it for my star selector. So in this case, universal selector can select everything, but its use case is very limited because there's not very many things, if ever, besides this one property that I'm actually changing across a whole web page. But for now, I'm going to put this in. All right, the next selector that we can talk about is an actual element selector. So each one of these HTML pieces that we've written actually get translated in the browser into objects in JavaScript, and specifically using the DOM. Now that's week 4, that's way out there. But for us, we need to understand that each one of these things is actually an element on the page. And we can actually reference the element by talking to its tag. So in this case, I could go to the header. Oh my gosh, typing is so bad today. Wow. Whew, okay. And you can see here that the syntax in which I'm writing looks like this. Now, when I say syntax, I want you to think the way in which you write your code or the grammar of how you write your code. So in this case, CSS syntax looks like this. Up here, we've got the selector. We've then got the curly braces that tell us how much we want to do inside the selector. And then we have properties that we manipulate, like color, for example. So let's see if we can overwrite the color red and just say color blue, just to see if we can see a difference here. So interestingly enough, the header tag was not specific enough compared to the universal selector. So the universal selector is actually going through each element. So let me kind of visualize that for you. So the universal selector is grabbing every one of these elements individually. Well, what we did here with the header tag is we said, I want to grab everything in the header. Do you see how that's not as specific? These smaller squares are more specific than this big square. So we have to be more specific than the universal selector. So the way we can do that is we can actually showcase the nesting. So there's that word again. So here's header, and then the H1 is nested inside of header. Well, the way we show that in CSS syntax is we use a space. So header, space, H1, space, and look at that. Now our color will go through. It overwrote the original color. So this is part of our other objective of demonstrating CSS specificity and inheritance to create and update styles. So what happens is CSS stands for cascading style sheets. So whenever I think of a cascade, I think of like a waterfall, and water cascading down some rocks. And in this case, the water at the bottom of the cascade is the conglomeration of all the water that came down, or the sum total of all the water that came down the cascade. In this case, the water started red, and then we turned it blue by using a more specific cascade. So this H1 is more specific than the universal selector. So we're going to keep talking about specificity as we continue to go down the list here. But I wanted to showcase to you that to get it to go blue, we had to be more specific than the universal red. Now, right now, these colors of blue and red are kind of silly. They're used for teaching. But as far as like getting these things to actually look good in our CSS, we would actually have to add some different styles. For example, if we wanted our headers to look a certain way, we can actually select multiple headings like this, like H1, and then I'm using a new syntactical piece here with a comma. It's like an H2, H3, H4, H5. This is as far as we'll go. So these are all different levels of headings that we can write in HTML. See, that's an H1, right? Then we have an H2 down here. Well, we could actually come in here and add some style to these. So I could say I want all the font size to be 20px, for example, if I wanted to like try it out. Then you can see all my headings are now 20px. So using a comma allows me to traverse through everything inside of my HTML and change the styles of them because I used multiple selectors. So you're going to see this quite a bit if developers want to select multiple items with different element names. So this is how we can go deeper in nesting. This is how we can go broader in our reach using commas. So these are the kind of things that we need to start learning now. These are things that we're going to start getting exposed to. So in this case, with our international airport website, we don't need the color red. It's not really important to us. We're going to go ahead and get rid of it. We'll come back to it for specificity later. We don't need blue. That's something that's not going to actually help our heading. But our H1, we probably want the font size to be bigger. So we could say font size In this case, we could say, 30px, just to showcase the visual hierarchy. That the international airport is the most important thing that we need our users to see. Then we'll have our navigation system, right? So if we go to our HTML, usually what I'm doing when I'm writing a new web page, when I've got a design file, I'll go and mark up all my HTML first so I get the semantics, so I get the meaning correct first. And then I'll come through a second time and add my styles over at the top of it to make it look like the design file that I received. So first pass, getting the semantics down. So we've already done that. We've got our meaning down. Second pass is now this design that we're throwing in. Now, in this case, I'm showing you and like teaching you along the way. But if we were doing it to actually get the project done, we would hopefully have a design file that we can reference when we're trying to match. We'll continue to see more of those things as we progress in the course, but for now, we're kind of just making this up as we go to make it look like somewhat of a website. So International Airport has a navigation system. Navigation system right now is kind of hard, like you couldn't click on these. We need some separation between these anchor tags. So what I can do is I can see how it started, so I know it's inside of my header. So it's a good idea to say header. Then I've got my nav tag, so then I'm going to do space, nav tag. And then I'm going to go into each one of these A tags and give myself some extra spacing. So I'm going to reference my A tag. See how that works? I've now created a pretty specific chain of element selectors. So header, nav, A. But notice that there's another thing down here that's got a navigation, right? So if I wanted to style these navigation items differently, I could use footer, right? If I wanted to have some difference between the two. But we'll come to footer at the bottom. For now, let's focus on the A tags here that we've got in our header. So I'm going to give it some margin. I know that A tags are inline elements, so they won't respect top and bottom. We'll talk about that more. But in this case, I just want to have some margin left of 20px. And you can see that I've got some space here now for my navigation. So we can control these things, and we're going to talk a lot about this. In fact, all of tomorrow, we'll be talking about how we can understand what the heck's going on when we use this margin. So, but I've given myself some spacing so it's easier to click on these things. And of course, probably a good idea to up the font size as well. So coming in here, and I could say, at least 18px font size so they're bigger and easier to click on. Now, we're just focusing on the selectors here. We're not focusing on the CSS styles right now. We're just trying to figure out how can I get this thing to even look different. The first A tag itself, for example, maybe we don't want to have that big gap on that first A tag. So what we could do, well, we could use a couple things, but that's the problem with CSS, is you can do like the same thing right 5 ways. But we're going to focus on using a class here just to showcase something different. So a class is just another special attribute. And I'm going to say first anchor, just so we're like super specific, is like there's no question. We could call this anything we want, by the way. And notice that I'm using a dash instead of a space, because a space will actually introduce multiple classes. So a dash, an underscore, or even a thing called camel casing are all valid, but usually in CSS, I'm using a dash or an underscore for my naming convention. So in this case, I've got a class called first anchor. So what I can do now is I could take the same selector if I wanted to. I could then add this on here and say first anchor. See that? See the difference between my A tag? Now I could put an A tag here, but I want to show you the difference between our element and our class name. Now what I could say is, well, you know what? On my first anchor, I don't want to have margin left 20. I want it to be 0, so it's up against the left wall here of my container. So I can actually use classes to overwrite elements. So classes are heavier in their specificity weight than equivalent elements. So this is a really good lesson on specificity and using classes. Now notice that classes have a dot in front of them. That's another syntactical piece, a new thing you've just got to memorize. to know that that's what a class looks like. So this class now has put this home on the left and aligned it up on the left here. Okay. There is something more specific than a class, though, and we can use an ID. So if there's ever a moment where we needed to actually say, you know what, I want to do something completely different, an ID has specific rules. It's another HTML attribute, just like class and href, but in this case, at least in an A tag, I should say. But an ID in class can be used on any tag, an H1, a header, a div, a P tag. An ID has a specific rule, though. You can only use one uniquely named ID per page. So that means I can only have one ID named whatever this is. So I'm going to say, you know, my custom link style or something. So in this case, this custom link style should only be named at one time by my ID. And the ID looks like this. Use an octothorpe or a hashtag or whatever you want to call it. In this case, this is what an ID looks like. So inside of CSS, we can actually overwrite our code even more. We could say, you know what? I want margin left to be 50 px. And it'll actually overwrite both the header style and the CSS class, and the class, and our ID will overwrite that. So IDs are extremely heavy, and I actually recommend against using them at all for CSS styling. I use IDs when I'm using JavaScript hooks, like if I need to hook into something with DOM selectors or something. But outside of that, I actually recommend you don't get used to using IDs. However, you do need to get used to seeing them because other developers might not have that same understanding. And they just think, well, if I use an ID, my style has a 50% chance of showing up more because they just don't know CSS. So make sure that when you're writing your code to avoid using IDs because of that specificity. However, if there are moments that you need to use them, use them. But you'll find them as you come along. Like right now, I just can't think of a reason we would need a custom ID right here other than to show you that it does work. So in fact, just to keep it up here, I'll change the color and we'll just say red for now on that first item. So that's an ID syntactically how it's different. Now notice that I didn't do this. I didn't say header, nav. I didn't need to because the ID is so heavy, it doesn't even need to have that specificity chain. However, it would be best practice to do something like that just in case. Well, it doesn't really matter because IDs are only allowed once per page for that name. Now, I've seen people get super confused when I said that. So make sure that you understand that you can have multiple IDs. You just can't have one that's called custom link style. This would throw an error if I tried to analyze my code and run it through a linter. You have to have a new name here, new unique name. That's valid code. So you're allowed to have as many IDs as you want that have unique names on them. However, my recommendation is that you just don't use them. Just don't use them right now. Understand why they work. Try to do everything with classes and HTML elements instead. There are different selectors, by the way, between classes and IDs, but they're just not something we need to worry about right now. We'll talk about them more as time progresses, but for now, let's just focus on the universal selector is selecting everything. Our elements are selecting specific elements that are matching names like header, H1, H1. And then we've learned about classes being more specific. So classes are usually used for repeating content. So we've got a lot of P tags here, right? Well, what if we wanted to change the line height for all of these P tags? Well, we could actually go in and grab the P tag itself. That'd be a good idea if we wanted to do something to all of them. So in CSS, it's a good idea that the more general that your code needs to be, the higher up in the page it goes, because the cascade does matter on the position in the code base. So what I mean by that is, as your CSS goes down, the specificity is heavier. So up here, we want things that are very lightweight. So this universal selector is extremely lightweight. Anything can override it. It's at the very tip top of that cascading waterfall mentality. Elements are heavier, so I want them lower on the page. IDs and classes are heavier than both of those, so they're lower on the page. So whenever I'm writing my CSS, I want to have my lightweight big general specificity things at the top, and then my more specific classes and IDs towards the bottom. So let me try this out. Let's put some line height in here. Line height is known from, and if you're coming from a print background, we have leading and kerning, and line height and letter spacing are the equivalents of leading and kerning in HTML. They're not as precise though. So line height is unitless, at least it should be, and it's going to go off of the unit that's provided to it. So if I type 1, you'll notice that everything just kind of shrunk up a little bit. That means that it's one equivalent space between. So let me draw this a little bit for you so you can see. It's like right there. That's the line height between each line of these p tags, the white space. So let me make it more exaggerated now that you know where to look. So let's see what happens when I hit 2. There you go. You can see how it's massive, right? A good rule of thumb is 1.25. It's just a good looking line height, easier to consume by users. And I like it. 1.5 is a little too much for me. It's a little too much distance. So 1.25 is easier for people to read that content. 1 is great if you're using a different font family that requires it, but 1.25 is usually my recommendation in a paragraph tag. So there you go. We've now manipulated every p tag. But what if we wanted to manipulate just the top 2 p tags? Well, then we have to start thinking about specificity. So we have to look at our HTML first to find out where does it live. So here's our section tag, and then here's our 2 p tags. Well, the problem is, if I go in here to my section tags, so I'm going to go lower on the page. These should be at the top of the page, by the way. So I'll put these up here. What if I type section p? Well, the problem is I have another section tag down here. So what could I do for a solution? What do you guys think? How could I solve this problem? Just type it in the main channel here. I could use a class. Could I use an ID? Totally could use an ID, actually. I could even use pseudo selectors, but the best idea would probably be to be a class. So that's the problem with CSS, and it's why people have such a headache with it, is because you can literally do it right 5 ways. And so that's where people really get frustrated with CSS. But there are general rules, and the general rules are try to avoid using IDs just because of specificity weight. So knowing that general rule, we could put a class on here, and we could say, top content, for example. And so I could hit save. So you have all my code. And instead of saying section, I could say section top content, by the way. And let's say I wanted to, color this stuff red just to see it. So you can see that my top 2 p tags have gone red, and these ones are still black. So, of course, this is just for learning, but we could do something here if we wanted to. Notice that there's no space here, by the way. So this is saying on the section tag, there is a class named top content. This could be considered redundant, like you don't need it. It still works, it's still red. But sometimes developers will do that just to say, look, this is where it is. But notice where it is in the hierarchy of our HTML. So if we minimize our header and our section, the only thing that's inside is container. So if you ever find something that could be written a million times, avoid doing that. We want to keep it dry. Try not to repeat yourself. So in this case, notice that header, I'm repeating myself, but guess what? I need to because there's only one header. Whereas with container, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 opportunities that I could say container. So basically, I could say container in front of everything I've written, and it would still be valid. So because of that, I don't need it. I can actually abstract it away to keep my code a little bit cleaner, easier to read for the next developer, and I don't go super long with my specificity chains. So the concept that I'm showing you here is called a specificity chain. Notice that I'm using an element selector and an ID to put all these things together to turn this thing red. But do I need these two? Nope. I can delete it and it'll still be red because IDs are so heavy. So that's why people are like, oh my gosh, CSS. But the general rule of thumb, just avoid IDs. and use classes and elements instead to create your selectors. And then you can start seeing some congruency. So if I minimized all these header tags, you can quickly identify, hey, this is just for my header styles. That's pretty cool. They're all contained. So you can put a little comment here and say, oops, CSS comments are different. It's /**//. So I could come in here and say, header styles here. And I'm basically writing the note to the next developer. And of course, you can get rid of white space, whatever you feel like is easier for you to read. And then you can say, look, these are my header styles. And now we have some formed content that actually makes sense. And oftentimes you will write content like this. And then our next thing that we were going into was our section styles, right? So, and we called it top content styles here. And so then we could start saying top content, right? All right, I'm going to get rid of my silly p tag since I was just showing you how it works and my ID thing. But this is how people start forming their content. So they'll come up here and they'll say general styles, like right here. And if you minimize all these styles, it's not so scary. Like you can kind of see what we just did here, right? So we've been putting up some general styles that apply to the whole page. We've then started making more specific styles that just apply to the header. And then of course, now we can go into we could even be more like general here and just say content styles here if we wanted to specifically style these two chunks of content. But you can see how comments can really help the next developer and help organize your code. Now, of course, all these things could be out like that, and you can read them. I prefer to have spacing between my selectors. It just helps my brain see things. But these comments help quite a bit when I'm trying to figure out where am I in my CSS. We're going to have even more of this organization next week. But for now, this is a great way to help organize your thoughts as you're grappling with CSS for the first time. Okay, now let me talk about, we've talked about IDs, we've talked about classes, we've talked about universal selectors, we've talked about elements. It's a lot of stuff. But in the way of selecting something, that's pretty much it. Like that's the way that we can select things. So let me stop here and ask if you have any questions about making selections with our code. Is there anything with the selectors specifically that was a little confusing? Okay, let's see. Joshua says, hey, what about IDs for hrefs to reference? And that's just fine. So there are some pages that have so much content that the page starts to scroll, right? And then you've seen navigations where if you click on the about or something, and then it goes and it scrolls down to the about section, those use anchor tags as well, and that's just fine. So that's a specific use case there, Josh. That's a good thing to call out. Michael says, can you reference the header and footer by maybe doing header footer? No, because header footer would, remember the spacing right here? I think it's a great question. But writing this is suggesting that in the HTML, header is outside of the tag footer. So for that to be true, it would need to look like this. And that's not something that we're going to be doing in our code. So I'm really glad you brought it up. But I want you to always try to think about what does the HTML look like that you're trying to match with your CSS. That was a great observation. Okay, I see the PMs are answering a lot of good questions. Darian says, is it best to keep classes in more parent elements rather than in child elements? Yeah, so Darren basically is saying, you know, instead of putting two classes on these p tags, would it be better to use the section tag to reference the p tags? The answer is yes. It's a better practice to do that if you're trying to go across multiple p tags versus putting a class on here that's like, you know, top content p, for example. So we could do this. This is valid code. And then I could come down here and say top content p. Put my dot on here because it's a class. And then I could say, you know, color red. versus coming up here and saying, well, my section tag top content P. So that's what Darian, is saying. Like, which one's better to use? And in my opinion, it's better to use something like this compared to this because the class is too specific. It's like, now only these two P tags can change. So it's a great question, but I prefer this top one. Is the CS specificity specifically for good practice, or is it necessary? For example, if you're using a specific class name, do you still need to show where it is nested in your code? Woo, really good question. And the answer to that is you want to follow some pattern. And so there are huge, massive CSS patterns that you can follow. But as long as you're being consistent, Rod, like that's what I would say. Be consistent. And it does matter for both good practices and just getting it to show up properly on the page. So, like, for example, one specificity level deeper, if all things are equal, will overwrite the other one. So we have to be very careful about where we're putting our stuff. Like, lower on the page does actually matter compared to higher on the page. Amir says, when do you use the section tag versus a div tag? So a section tag is wrapping up a section of content that you want the browser to know about, and you're calling it out specifically and saying, this is a section of content. A div tag could be used for anything. It could be used for a random shape on a page or something like that. So for example, if I wanted to style my container, because right now this web page just gets bigger and bigger, right? It doesn't have any kind of control. So what we could do is we could come up here and it'd probably be under our general styles, right? Because it's very tip top of the page. And so remember this div up here that's controlling everything. So I could come in here and say width 600 px. And now it'll only be 600 px wide. See how it got chunked into here to 600 px. And then I could say margin 0 auto, which we'll talk about tomorrow, to center my content on the page. And of course, I could say 400, 500, right? But this shows you that we can control everything with our CSS using divs for presentation only. But if all the CSS was gone, if I took all this and just deleted it, this still has to have some kind of meaning for the browser because CSS is just for markup, it's just for style and for aesthetics. Great question. Christian says, earlier you showed us how Chrome has a default CSS style for header tags. Does it differ in other browsers? Yes. And we'll talk about how we can control that in some ways tomorrow with a CSS reset. Jack says, what about when you have things that potentially describe the same thing, like main and section? So main is showing your main content, and section tags are shorter chunks of content. So in that case, Jack, that's when you start getting into the nuances of working with your marketing team and trying to figure out, the algorithm that Google's using. Honestly, it's a massive headache to try to get these things because Google never ever reveals things. They do it on purpose because they're making money off of it. And so the Google machine, and because they're the biggest, most popular search engine out there, they make a lot of the rules. It's pretty maddening. They actually won't come out and say something is or is not valid sometimes because they're playing with it themselves. So you just have to do the best you can with the knowledge you have. I'm sorry to say it, but it's super frustrating. Anthony says, is it better to nest a div tag inside of a section tag rather than just giving the div tag class a container? No, because all of this content here is not a section. It's like a website, right? So we've got a header, we've got a section, so you can see how my div tag is just literally only so I could center it and give it a width. Like I'm only using this container tag for style. I'm not using it for any kind of meaning. But here I've got meaning, I've got a header, and I've got a section tag. It's a great question. Dwayne says, can you manipulate images with CSS? Yes. Anything that you see in HTML can be manipulated in CSS. And image tags are extremely important for us to understand. We're going to talk more about those tomorrow. So many things tomorrow. Tomorrow's like all style day, like 100% style. So the thing that you need to get, like the big ticket items are here. Can you get things with CSS selectors? Yes, you can. You know how to do that now. You can use our header, our H1, our A tag, our class. You know how to do those things now. Demonstrate CSS specificity. So we've been demonstrating it, but let me give you like a better visual diagram of this. I always do this. I probably should just make this official and put it in the training kit. I don't know why I don't do that. So, but it's just because this is the only way I think about it. But I always make a little waterfall in my head and draw it out here. So I think about CSS like this. I think about it like a cascading waterfall. Okay, so here's our waterfall. And then I'm going to get some water. And the water comes down from the top of the mountain. And we come down here. Okay. So each one of these cascades represents a specificity level. So in this case, we have our star selector that's right here. And everything I'm talking about, by the way, is in the training kit. So make sure that you're spending time on that training kit, or this is going to kick your butt. If you're solely hanging on the words that I'm saying in the guided project, you're doing it wrong. Like, you need to go to the training kit and be prepared before class so that this stuff doesn't freak you out. And we can talk about it more openly. Like, hey, this is a universal selector. And you're like, yep, I read it and watched it. Now, the expectation, by the way, is just to either watch or read. I don't expect you to do both, but I do think that you need to be prepared. So here's our star selector. Then we come down here. I don't know why I'm going all the way over there. Then I've got my element. Then I've got my class. Then I've got my ID. Then I've actually got some interesting stuff down here we'll call inline styles. And then at the very bottom of the page, we've got important. And I'll talk about that shortly. But this cascade, I really do need to do a better job of getting this. I'm going to draw this out and make it look pretty later. But in this case, this is a really derpy version of what's going on. So the bottom of our waterfall is the end result. It's what we're seeing here, right? It's basically like layered on styles on top of each other. And then these things have more and more layering power, which we call specificity. So let me show you those last two that we haven't discussed, and then I'll let you go try your project this afternoon. Actually, you'll go to lunch. So in this case, let's say that we wanted to change our P tag from red to blue, just to show a difference here. So if I come over to my section content here, remember, if you recall down here, I've got my P tag turning everything red. Well, you can actually overwrite this with an ID. We saw that. But something that's more specific than an ID is called an inline style. And that's right. We can actually write style inside of the tag as an attribute. This is pretty intense stuff here. And you'll see this more and more as you enter CSS and JavaScript in some ways. And this is valid. This is like actually how the internet started, was inline styles were way more prevalent, I should say. And you can actually write the color you want in here. So I could say blue, just for this specific P tag. So you can see over here it says plan or flight. Oh, I'm on the wrong P tag, but you can see there's the red. Let me bring this up to the red one just to show you that the specificity does actually get impacted. So here's my class and everything, right? Let me give myself some breathing room here. So style, color blue, and look at that. It actually overwrote the class that we wrote. And notice that we're at the bottom of the page. Like, specificity-wise, this is as good as it gets inside of our normal flow. But inline styles are so heavy in their specificity that it actually just overwrote the original red color. That's crazy. But guess what? There's something worse that we showed you at the bottom of that waterfall, and that is exclamation point important. This will overwrite everything on the page unless something else has important on it. So my recommendation is to understand what exclamation important does, never use it. unless you need to. So the only time that you should ever use this is if you've got a third-party library like Bootstrap or Material UI or something like that, and they're using it, and then you need to overwrite their stuff. That's the only time that I would give you permission to use important. Otherwise, I'm going to call you out and say you don't know CSS. So anytime that I see an important, it's because the developer doesn't know how to use CSS. It's just it's that simple. Unless there's a third-party library. So watch this. If all things are equal, this important will win. So in this case, important on an inline style, you got to spell it right. Important. This is the worst thing known to CSS kind. So never do this. An inline style with an important on it. This is the Death Star of specificity. Never do this. Because the next developer will be inside of their code and like, what the crap? Anything I do is not working. Even important doesn't work. Then you go look at the HTML and you go, oh my gosh, whoever did that should die in a fire of specificity. So never do that. So get rid of our important tag. Never, never, ever do that. An inline important. That's just so bad. But people do these things because they don't know CSS. Okay. So you've now been exposed and introduced through a guided project, some concepts that are outlined in these videos. So those of you that are like, for example, I remember that question, like, well, we're coming from the UX program, maybe we don't have as much experience. You absolutely must watch these videos because they give you everything that we've talked about in smaller doses. So instead of having like a 2-hour span where you're learning and grappling with ideas and we're answering questions and all sorts of stuff happens, these don't have those problems. These are specifically about the concepts that are inside the training kit. So make sure that you're reading these pieces of content and or watching the videos before you come to class or after. By the way, our time is up. I'm going to send you off to lunch to work on your project. And so with your project today, maybe you're going to get through and go, man, what was that CSS selector? I'd actually recommend not coming back and watching the guided project at that point. I recommend coming to this video and watching this video and scrubbing through it and just trying to find the syntax again. Like, use these videos as your first resort instead of a last resort. I would say even before Google, because we've taken the time to put these together for you. So make sure you watch these. These are gold for you to understand conceptually what we need you to do. If these videos don't answer the questions, then of course, go elsewhere. But these videos are really important, as well as all the content that we've written. So everything I've talked about with you, it's all in here. The guided project is a way for me to showcase how these things are used and not necessarily expose them to you for the first time. Like, if you were exposed to a lot of new concepts today, that's something that you might be going, that's not how we want it to be. We want you to be exposed early so that guided projects are a further exploration into them. So this is our first day, though. Like, you just heard this for the first time. Now that you've seen a Lambda School lesson in action, you're going, okay, I can put all these things together for tomorrow. So for tomorrow, I want you to make sure that you've already watched all of the videos for user interface 2. So you've watched these 3 videos before you come to class. And we've given you time to do that, just in case your schedule is crazy busy and you couldn't get to it. We've given you an hour before class dedicated to watching these videos. Okay? So make sure you spend the time so that tomorrow you're even more prepared. I know it's the first day. I get it. But tomorrow I want you to be prepared. Okay, so here's how the projects work here. If you open up your window just ever so slightly bigger, you get this little menu system over here. This is a result of our code. We're changing things, but if you've not seen this menu, expand your website a little bit bigger on the training kit, and you'll see this menu pop up. Hit Projects, and you've got 2 projects today. They're both inside of CodePen, so here's how I want you to turn them in. Go ahead and click on the assignment first. It looks like the same thing we've done. I just want you to get repetition practice with these things. So you're going to go through here and mark up this code, just HTML. Don't worry about your CSS. And then when you're done with this, you can send this link to your project manager to say, look, I've got done with my project. This one shouldn't take as long as the other one. This is just another practice warm-up piece. The second one is a little bit bigger project. If you've had no CSS experience, this is going to take some time. If you've got a bunch of CSS experience, you should probably cruise through this and get to the stretch goal. So all the instructions are written in comments here. So make sure you read all the comments. Up here, I've got HTML. I want you to study the HTML. There's a bunch of content in here. Maybe you've seen something you've not seen before. So I want you to study this code and go, what is going on here with this link tag and font families, and study that stuff on your own. In this case, follow the steps. So task 1, fork the pen. So you're going to fork it and make it yours. Then you're going to explore the CSS, look at the unique selectors so you can see all these selectors. Notice I've got a bunch of content, a bunch of comments in here. I want you to read these comments and follow the instructions in the comments. So in this case, create a margin property, set the value to 20px. I don't expect you to know what margin is like to the nth degree at this point. I just want you to write a margin property. So you would say margin 20px. That's what this would translate to. And then you can see the HTML changed a little bit. The rendering thing out. So that's how this is going to work. You're going to follow all these properties line by line, and eventually it'll form up how your website looks. Instead of this monstrosity, it should look like the final result. And you can actually see the final result by popping this in the URL up here. So you click this URL, and you should see the Sweet Eats Bakery webpage. Okay, this is just our first foray into CSS and understanding it. Now, if you cruise through that and you've got some extra time in your project this afternoon, all these projects were built such that you should be done by the time that you have to be ready for stand-up. So we've built these in mind, knowing that they're kind of bite-sized projects that you can get done before your retrospective and your PM stand-up. But also remember, in the calendar, I've asked you to watch those 2 Git videos. So remember, go to your calendar and inside your project time here, remember there are these 2 videos right there. So make sure you're watching both these videos. So click on the link, watch the video. This one's 18 minutes long, and this one's 5 minutes long. So basically, you're going to be introduced to the terminal or the command line interface. You're going to be doing some basic commands, following along with the video, and that's it. And we're doing this on purpose because all these little drop videos, we're going to do a full day on Thursday with 100% Git. It's going to be that's going to be our 2 hours of command line interface and Git. So by the time you get to Thursday, by watching all these videos in the afternoon, you'll see every afternoon we've got videos to watch. And by the way, that's only this week. Next week, those videos go away and you just work on the project. So if you're ever in doubt and you're like, what should I be doing? Open up your calendar, and we've told you exactly what you should be doing. So if you've got your Git videos done, go ahead and work on your projects, and you can click on that. It'll take you to it'll take you over here, and you can work on it. Okay, question was asked, project time is solo? It is, but you can actually pair program with people if you'd like. So do we have a pair programming channel set up yet, Josh? Can't remember if it's set up yet. We will have it set up, though, if it's not. It should be Web18_pair programming. And if you want to go into that channel, you can say, hey, does anybody want a pair program? Then you can do that. But the only time, so Sean specifies no pair programming on Friday sprints. Okay, we'll get that set up. I would recommend that you try this out yourself just to see how far you can get. Remember the learn to learn. Remember the pin. 20 minutes, help channel, project manager. Make sure you get into that mode when you're asking questions when it's during the project time. Okay. For those of you that are feeling good about everything I've said, you're free to go. I'm going to go ahead and stay here for a couple more minutes and answer any questions in the questions thread. Let's see. William says, I was taught the star selector should be used box sizing inherit, and the box sizing border box should go in the body HTML selector. Is that wrong? Are we using pixels instead of rems, ems? You're getting too far ahead. Yes, you are. But I love it. That just shows me that you're ready, William. So, William, coming back to your first question with the star selector, actually, box sizing border box, usually, if we were to Google, I think Paul Irish has one of my favorite ones, but Paul Irish box sizing. This is back in 2012. It's pretty old, but the concept still remains the same. So this is kind of what you were talking about here. And so people will use this quite a bit. So box sizing border box on all the HTML, and then a star selector, and then the before and after pseudo selectors. But it's just beyond what we're talking about right now. And just a simple star selector for box sizing does everything that we're doing. But yeah, this is exactly what you're talking about. And a lot of people will do this. So keep doing what you've been doing. Joseph says, will we get into REM-M? Yes. So REM and M are introduced next week. We just need to focus on the basic fundamentals. Like, this is a fundamental recap week where we talk about, I mean, tomorrow's fundamentals, and it's going to kick your butt, guaranteed, even if you're feeling confident. The fundamentals are not easy. We're going to be talking about box model, inline block. It's going to be really good stuff, really heady stuff. 100% CSS, like I said, tomorrow. So yeah, William, I'm all on board with your approach. Looks good. Oscar says, so are we on our own for the project time? Oh, sorry, we already answered that. And the answer is, you're not on your own. You can pair program. Josh already set it up. There it is, Web18 pair programming. You do have to go join the channel if you need, though. I think it's Davia. If I'm wrecking your name, let me know, because everybody wrecks my last name. But Davia says, do we need to push today's project to GitHub or just send the CodePen links to our PM? Just send the CodePen links to your PM, because we're not using GitHub yet. We will. This will be the only week we don't do that, and then it'll be GitHub from the rest of your time here. And in fact, we actually get into GitHub on Wednesday, so it's only the first 2 days, actually. We just have to ease you in, toe in the water, get to the deep end as soon as possible. Okay, Marina says, when do we use space between tag and class name, and when no space between them? For example, nav class name or nav space class name. And so the answer to that is nesting. Marina, great question. But if you recall over here in our international airport, I forgot to get an image up here of an airplane. That does not help. I'll get that up there. But in this case, our spacing right here, Marina, that space indicates nesting occurred. So that means the H1 is literally inside of the header. Versus if we had a dot here and there was a class, that means that the header has a class on it. So that's the difference between those two. Does that answer your question, Marina? If not, I can keep explaining. Patrick says, can you show, awesome. Patrick says, can you show what the best practice for the CodePen submissions? I was never totally sure. Yep, sure. So in this case, Patrick, let's say that you were done with Sweetie's Bakery, for example. So then I hit fork, and now it's mine. So I could come in here and I could say Sweetie's Bakery, and then I could say like Patrick Stevenson. Or Steveson, sorry. So Patrick Steveson, and we come in here, and now you work on your project. Let's say you got all your project done, you hit save, and you send this URL back to your instructor. Does that make sense? Cool. I'm gonna go ahead and delete this just because, you know, I don't want to mess with your stuff. And it's Lambda, so nothing will hurt you. Because in this case, it's just my own project there. I think that was it. Okay, Irving says, so we come back at 3 p.m. and start working on your project. Okay, remember, I asked you to look at your calendar. So look at your calendar. Whatever your calendar says, it should be matching your local time. So if you're Eastern time, your calendar should be Eastern time. If it's not, there's a setting you can do inside of Google to make sure that it's your local time. Look, I know this is the suckiest thing about people that are Eastern time or international, because we have a little bit of both. And I know that lunch being not at noon is rough, you know. So make sure you're eating when you need to, having a bigger breakfast, plan accordingly. That's just one of the logistical problems with the United States of having multiple time zones. So I apologize now to you East Coasters that are coding into the night. Some of you could look at it as an advantage. You know, you don't have to get up early versus our people that are in California actually getting up at 8 a.m. Plus, 7, hopefully getting prepared. But yeah, that is just a logistical issue with having a big country and a big world we live in. Okay, I think I've answered all the questions that I saw in the thread. Thanks, everybody. Congratulations, you survived your first day of guided projects, I should say. You still have a whole day of project time ahead of you. So make sure you go take an hour lunch. You don't have to come right back. Take whatever time you need to just de-stress and come back, watch those 2 Git videos, and then work on your project. I will see you tomorrow where we won't have to talk about Slack and Zoom and all this stuff. We can get right into programming from the first minute. I'm really excited about tomorrow. So make sure you watch those videos and warm up properly. And remember, all the things you need are inside your calendar. So make sure you click it and find out what you need to do. Thank you. I'm excited. You should be excited too. Have a good afternoon. See ya.